Hello fellow humans, my name is Poppy and I've got even more archived travel footage I'd like to share with you guys. This time from one of our slightly weirder family holidays, when we spent 2 weeks in the Valencian municipality of Els Poblets in September 2021, amidst lifting COVID restrictions, torrential rainstorms, jellyfish invasions, and more. Now, if I'm being completely honest, the reason it's taken me this long to turn this footage into a vlog is that I really wasn't sure it was interesting enough for people, and I know that's a great way to pitch my content, but looking back on it with a couple years hindsight, I do think it makes for a pretty funny foray into our somewhat ill-fated holiday. And don't get me wrong, there were still a lot of good bits, but mixed in amongst those were plenty of moments of unbridled, nature-fueled chaos. So if it made me laugh looking back at it, I sincerely hope that it will at least somewhat entertain you as well. If not, there's not much I can do. You can carry on with your lives, it's fine. Now there is a lot of stuff to get through, so I won't dilly-dally any longer. The journey there was pretty smooth, all things considered. It is about 8 AM. I am fully packed and dressed, just waiting for the taxi. And then the journey begins. We got to the airport with plenty of time to spare, because this was during that stage of COVID when airport queues were taking like 5 hours and we really didn't want to risk anything. So I ended up in WH Smith and bought 3 more books for the trip. Oops. Then we boarded the plane, where I copped a tomato juice in my usual travel mode fashion, and got stuck right into my shiny new novel, Louise Candlish's The Heights. I was particularly excited to see the latest release of hers on the shelves because her previous book, Our House, was easily my favourite lockdown read. It felt like it was meant to be. And that's why I refused to put it down during our stopover at London Heathrow, where I also had a Virgin Mary. In other words, more tomato juice. Then it was time for our second flight. Here's a snippet of the announcement over the PA to remind you of that grim period.
We'll be coming through shortly to give out some antibacterial wipes for your personal use in flight. To safely dispose of personal protective equipment, please use the sealable disposable bag provided, which will be collected later on in the flight by the crew. Any questions at all, don't hesitate to ask. Enjoy the flight.
And here's my third tomato juice of the day, followed by my complimentary airplane meal. It was actually pretty lit as these things go, especially the panna cotta-esque dessert. Our journey ended with a drive from Valencia Airport to Els Poblets, where our hosts greeted us with wine, which isn't really my thing personally, but is obviously a really cute gesture. And then we walked for about 30 seconds to the nearest restaurant for some dinner. It was called Lacombe, and soon became our go-to spot in the area. On this first night, we went for an assortment of cheesy as well as seafoody treats we miss in England, like grilled cuttlefish and chopitos. And next thing I knew, it was day 2. We woke up to a shining sun, as one would expect, not knowing how soon everything was about to change.
Good morning, folks. The sun is shining, so obviously we're gonna go to the beach, which is there. And in case you guys were wondering, here's my beach OOTD.
I mean, it's beach clothes. How exciting. What really was exciting, though, was finding my favourite Spanish carton-based drink in the fridge. I absolutely cannot get enough of bifrutas. Anyway, beach. We had a little baby trek over the pebble beach nearest to us, so we could get down to the sand one a few hundred metres down. Side note, how cute are these little sea balls? They were everywhere, and yes, that is their official non-Latin name. But yeah, it was definitely worth walking just a little further, because this spot was not only comfier, but virtually empty. We had a massive expanse of sand all to ourselves and shamelessly sprawled out to soak up some long-needed vitamin D. Did you know about 1 in 6 adults in the UK don't have enough of the stuff? That's a not-so-fun fact for you. So you can bet my day pretty much just involved swimming and sunbathing for hours. After photosynthesizing and exercising, it was time for dinner. We got all snazzed up and headed out, only to be greeted by the super friendly neighbourhood cat. Unfortunately, the restaurant we planned to try next was fully booked, and all the others were closed, so we ended up back at Lacombe for the second night in a row. This time, though, the atmosphere was a little more dramatic. The evening started with some distant lightning as we ordered our meals. but by the time the drinks were poured and the food had arrived, we were being hit by some pretty strong winds. My octopus was nevertheless enjoyable though, despite the environment making it harder to eat. And as the storm continued its crescendo, we were encouraged to leave the restaurant and head home, which we had no qualms about, frankly.
We've had to leave the restaurant early because the storm is starting. Lightning, thunder, rain.
On the way back, we bumped into our new friend who was also on his way to shelter. And it's a good thing we left when we did, because the storm worsened drastically, continuing deep into the night. Oh, and the next morning.
In the aftermath of last night's storm, which I guess technically hasn't even finished yet, it wouldn't really be a good idea to go to the beach right now.
With the weather being absolutely booty-holicious, my sister and I decided to venture out to the local mini-market as a semi-indoor activity to pass the time. We got some bits, marvelled at the adorable milk bottles, and then found ourselves in the midst of another bad spell. The rain was only spitting down at first, to be clear, but then we noticed the waves getting more treacherous as the wind picked up again.
Yes, it's pretty stormy.
Next thing we knew, we were drenched. And once back inside, we watched the relentless rainfall as we indulged in the findings from our recent forage. And by that, I mean we ate what we got in the shop for lunch, of course. We killed the next few hours with TV and whatnot, and then were faced with a dilemma. The dilemma of a dinner reservation our dad had made that morning, when he was perhaps a little too optimistic about the weather improving later on. The camera honestly doesn't do it justice, but the rain was so heavy it seemed dangerous to walk in. And yet, for some reason, we tried it anyway. I didn't bother with proper shoes, because I knew they'd be damaged, so I flip-flop hopped across the slippery floor while the rest of my family did their best to protect their wares.
Whoa! Oh no! It's like the lizard!
Here's the real kicker though. When we got there, the owners said they'd closed because they weren't expecting anyone to show. They didn't want to send us back, but we'd essentially braved the forces of nature only to be an inconvenience as they begrudgingly cooked our meal. We felt super awkward about being there, and the food was nothing to write home about. So this marked the first of a couple less joyous dining experiences we had on that trip. But hey, maybe the next day would be better. Right?
Well, it's the next day. The weather is still pretty not beachy, but it's my dad's birthday, so we're gonna try and chill at the house in a special way.
The salty seaside winds were still super intense, but on the plus side, seemed to do nice things to my curls. Anyway, we then lunched on seafood bits like boquerones and pulpo en vinagre, as we watched the storm continue till dinner time, for which we'd made another reservation at one more local restaurant called Hero. Now please indulge me while I do another outfit presentation.
I'm wearing some hand-me-downs and some gifts, so it's all sustainable here. This is my mum's dress from the early 2000s or 90s, I'm not sure. And some accessories.
Eating at Hero was an unusual endeavour, as the menu was formatted so you could combine any available protein and side for your main. For example, I picked the prawn and scallop skewers and paired them with some linguine because we all know pasta is like crack to me, and sure enough, they tasted pretty bussin' indeed. And for dessert, I had this gecko. I'm joking, of course, it just happens to be the last thing I filmed that day, so moving on.
Well, today it's my sister's birthday, and it's still a little bit stormy, but as a treat, we're gonna have a day trip to Valencia, so hopefully the weather is decent there.
After a decently speedy taxi ride into the city, our first stop was the stunningly expansive Mercat Central, or Central Market. Not only was the building itself a fantastic sight to behold, with its ornately beamed roof, symmetrical angles and shapes, joyous ceiling murals, delicate glasswork, and gorgeous traditional tiles, but the contents of the market stalls too. From the boundless supply of quintessentially Spanish meats, whether on the bone or in a sandwich, To the array of fresh fruit and even fresher juices at what felt like every other stall, to the mushrooms, so many mushrooms, to the mouth-watering selection of seafoods and fish in every colour, shape and size, to the olives and preserves, Spanish omelettes or tortillas, touristy knickknacks, you get the idea. There was just an abundance of absolutely everything, making for a genuinely captivating and enticing stroll around, marvelling at all the goods. Unfortunately, there were some builders doing construction just outside, and we got a little bit catcalled a couple of times, which wasn't the best way to end it, but hey-ho. After leaving the market, we essentially just went for an extended exploratory wander around the city. We would walk down whichever alley took our fancy, pop into a shop if the temptation arose, or just admire the sights around us. I loved seeing so many palm trees dotted around the city, and I especially liked taking in all the beautiful architecture that surrounded us. We ambled along a multitude of streets in a range of sizes, the likes of which were lined with buildings boasting colourful, ornate facades and charming little balconies. Honestly, there were just so many gorgeous structures, it was hard to know where to look. I kept fantasizing about owning one of those adorable spaces myself. One of the spots we accidentally stumbled upon was this semi-sheltered market square in the centre of some apartments. I'd never seen anything like it before, so we perused its stalls a little as well, but it had a lot of touristy stuff, so we didn't stay long. We also stopped at a cafe called Lizaran, where I was served a delightfully artisanal and homemade cold chocolate. Haha. And then we naturally found ourselves in Plaza del Ayuntamiento, or Plaza Ayuntamiento in Spanish, with its chunky fountain in the centre and landmark buildings all around. I spotted a retro cinema on one side of the square, which was noteworthy for me because film graduate, I guess, and then couldn't get over how cute these florist huts on one end were. Something that really stood out to me though was the floor. Like, this marble didn't have to go so hard in a public outdoor space, but I loved it, as I did the tiles in other areas, and even this comically wide zebra crossing nearby. Why is she so thick for? I mean, I get why, but still. Anyway, we then made our way to the Art Nouveau Estacio del Nord, or North Station. We didn't have a train to catch or anything, we just wanted to see what was up because it was meant to be pretty. And yes, it certainly was. And now here's where stuff gets dire. We had been walking around for a while, trying to find an appropriate spot for lunch, when we finally settled on one place that seemed, suitable. That was until we sat down at the table and were greeted by a family of cockroaches on the table and the floor around us. Now, I didn't capture this on video because obviously other things were on my mind, but just picture us backing away and apologising while we exclaimed the word cucarachas and not much else. It was less than ideal, so we ended up in a spot that was just a bit Nothing was terrible, but neither the atmosphere nor dishes lived up to our expectations. Each item felt a little below the standard of quality we're used to when it comes to Spanish cuisine, which is possibly my favourite in the world, I might add. But it was all simply fine. So, yeah, lunch was overall a bit of a failed mission. But at least dessert was fun. We happened upon Niji, a dessert shop that exclusively sells giant balls of ice cream mochi, in either solid or gloopy form, and bought ourselves an assortment of flavours to try. Because of the solid chocolate coating on mine, I did struggle to bite into it at first, but my blob was nevertheless delicious. And from mochi, we go to mucho. I just wanted to quickly mention one shop we visited by name. Muy Mucho is a chain of funky homeware stores, and although I didn't buy anything because I was travelling light, I'd gladly go back and cop a few things some other time. The whole shop smelled amazing and had so many quirky but practical items for sale. After that, we strolled a little more, and then it was time to return home to Els Poblets. So we hopped back in a taxi and sat helpless as the weather grew angrier the closer we got to our apartment. There are those violent waves again, and that's my mum documenting these trees, of which the branches and leaves moved not too dissimilarly to the hair on my head. And that's where I gave up. Filming, I mean, although I was pooped as well and slept deeply until the next morning. Well, another day, another load of waves and wind. At least it's not raining right now, for now. Maybe if the sun comes out we can go to the beach later. It's, it's looking like that. Yeah, no. We didn't get a chance to go to the beach. So we had another snack lunch at home and saved our energy for a third dinner at our trusty neighbour, Lacombe. There was certainly something atmospheric about eating semi-outdoors while the skies and seas seemed to be at war. And if you're wondering, I had some of their perfectly grilled cuttlefish and stole a few bites of my dad's Cuttlefish Inc. paella as well. Cephalopod heaven. On to day 7.
What do you think you're doing? He's padding. He's feeling good.
Evidently, the sun as well as our furry friend had finally come out to greet us again, so there was only one thing to do.
We are going to make the most of that, even though it's still chillier than it was when we first arrived. At least it's not raining, there's no lightning. So yeah. Oh, and I've actually remembered my book this time. Beaching. Vibing. Yeehaw.
But before I could scour the shoreline for more sea balls, I had a brief humbling moment where I found myself in awe of the world and its natural power.
Wow, okay, so the level of the seaweed has changed dramatically because most of this beach was just sand before. And this stream in front of me didn't exist because these were the steps down and you'd just walk. You wouldn't have to climb over anything. So, I'm all sun creamed up. I've never been this white in my life and it's horrifying. That's what Britain does to you, it sucks the colour out, limo. And I think I'm gonna go for a dunk soon.
And dunk I certainly did, before finally getting back into my book after having spent too many days watching TV and editing videos for this channel instead. Then, in an effort to make the most of this day in the sun, we finally had lunch at the beach bar just behind where we'd been sitting, called Lacombe. Naturally, we got ourselves some liquids and then ordered all kinds of food, from a beefy burger to some shimmery sardines. I personally chose the seafood tagliatelle because I'm a creature of habit, and had a fun little time undressing my prawn friends before devouring them. After a day in the sand, which I captured no more of, presumably due to my being too relaxed, it was time to do a little shop. And while we were back in the mini market, I had a thought that I just needed to voice.
One of the things I really miss about continental Europe is the sheer range of pasta in any supermarket. I mean, this one is a particularly small village one, and there's still so much to choose from.
This is black squid ink pasta. It's one of my favourites in the world and I will definitely be taking it back.
And then it was time for the girlies to have their own little night out, at Lacombe once again, because this town really didn't have loads going on. We had some mojitos, nibbled our freebies, and then I opted for the clams, making sure to request the restaurant's super uniquely shaped chips, which we had come to adore, as well. Once again, no complaints. Everything that restaurant touches turns to gold as far as I'm concerned. In terms of day 8, there wasn't much to report. We fortunately got lucky with the weather again and had a pretty similar itinerary.
So that's day 3 of actually beaching completed. And now we're gonna stay home and have some snacky dinner and stuff like that and wind down and yeah, vibes.
Also, now's a good time for me to mention that behind the scenes of all this footage that you're seeing around these few days, I was gradually finding more and more red marks on my legs, and I had felt some tingles under the water, so I sort of suspected jellyfish stings, but I couldn't see anything every time I felt them, so I wrote it off, but only temporarily.
Okay, pardon the very salty sandy hair. It's doing what it wants to do. But today is day 8 or something. And I've started reading Marina, which is by Carlos Ruiz Zafón, and he is one of my favourite authors because he wrote the Shadow of the Wind series, so I'm really excited to get into this book. And it's also set in Barcelona, which is one of my favourite cities. So all around good things. I'm also accompanied by a chocolate frío and a Valenciana.
Okay, if you haven't personally combined a chocolate drink, whether it's hot or cold, with one of these delightful little Spanish sponge cakes, then you are seriously missing out. I first picked up the combo when I went to Madrid and was hosted by an older woman who would serve it to me as breakfast every single morning. She'd whip out her Valencianas and make a hot chocolate, and it was great. Probably not the most nutritious, but she put me onto something amazing, so I am passing this beautiful simplicity onto you guys. Anyway, it was on this day that we were finally able to try the other seaside eatery, Restaurant El Tres Mal, and it very quickly shot to the top, or maybe second from the top, spot on our ranked list of all the local restaurants. I ordered myself the fideuà, because pasta trumps rice any day. And yes, I know these dishes are usually meant for at least 2 people to share, but I knew what I was getting myself into, and I had a plan. So once I was done scranning as much as I could of that carby, crustacean-y goodness, I just scooped it all into a doggy bag for later. If that's some kind of culinary crime, just arrest me. Sometimes it's okay not to share. I also had a fresh-ass vanilla ice cream, and then we spent a few more hours at the beach before I scooped the rest of that massive pan's contents into a bowl for dinner. It was just as good as before, and I topped it off with a flan de huevo from the mini market. And what do you know, we've hit day 10.
And we're just beaching again. I'm gonna have to be a little bit more careful because for the past 2 days I've been stung by jellyfish in the water because it's quite murky. At first I wasn't sure what it was, but then yesterday I finally spotted one, little pesky boy. So just gonna have to watch out for them, and otherwise chill. It's a bit colder today, but at least it's not stormy like it was.
As always, I had come through with a chalky milk and valencianas, and then we returned to the slightly bougier Lacombe for our midday meal. I ordered some ceviche, but had erroneously pictured the Latin American version, and I must confess, struggled to enjoy the moist raw onion and fish that lay before me. Fortunately, it was more to my dad's tastes, so we did some swapsies around the table, and the desserts were pretty standard, but still decent. Our at-home dinner consisted of some annoyingly cute cuttlefish, with a side of mandatory COVID tests due to how long we'd been in the country, and I finished on some fruity yogurt. And then I didn't film for a couple of days because I felt like things were getting a bit repetitive, so you're welcome.
Hello folks, I haven't really checked in a while, but that's because there hasn't been anything major to report. 2 days ago we went to the beach. I had more fideuà de marisco and got stung by more jellyfish. And then yesterday it was meant to be stormy, and so we went to the beach particularly early. We got up and then we came back for lunch and it was quite grey, so we didn't go out again, and I worked on a video for you guys.
And now we're going to the beach again. Fortunately it is sunny. We're now heading off to our final daytime restaurant-y trip. In other words, lunch at the beach.
So, turns out I lied about that being our last lunch out, but nevertheless, it was El Tres Mal's turn once more. So I had a fat octopus tentacle, which of course popped off.
Well, I finished my Carlos Ruiz Zafón book, so I decided to come back to the flat and get another one. It's called 3 Dark Crowns, and it's by Kendare Blake. I also went on an ice cream run.
Spoiler alert, I couldn't put that book down, and ordered the next 3 in the series before even getting back home to England. And yes, I've since completed and enjoyed them all. Also, if you guys would be interested in me doing book reviews or anything like that, let me know in the comments. I'd love to make that kind of content too. Sadly, the beach got a bit cold in the afternoon. The sun was out, but the wind was so strong that I had to wrap up like a baby. Oh, and if you're wondering, it was another night of Spanish-infused girl dinner. And then our final, fortunately sunny, day was upon us.
Well, it's Saturday, but it's hardly busy.
You know I had no choice but to hit the chalk and sponge combo one last time. So we did some more beaching and then strolled over for an actual final lunch at Tres Mal. As always, we were handed some fun little aperitivos on the house, but then also got some pan con tomate y aioli. Personally, I went for some small fried fish, but I don't remember exactly which type they were, with a sippy side of sangria. Then, almost as if he knew, we had one last sighting of our feline friend on the way back home.
So, that's the end of our final beach day here, and all we can do now is have a nice last dinner, and then wake up tomorrow and travel back to rainy England.
And here you can see me showing off the fact that I got moderately snazzed up in my favourite cord by the hippie shake, plus some accessories from all over, because
It's time for the final dinner.
despite the sun of a few hours prior, the evening was still face-scrunchingly windy. Now, it'll probably come as a surprise to no one, But we chose to have our final dinner where it all began, and also repeated multiple times in the interim, done. The staff were just so lovely and their food always hit the spot, so it was a no-brainer really. We were once again served some fun little freebies, and yeah, I went for their bomb-ass cuttlefish one last time. Sorry, but it had to be done. I also had no choice but to get their groovy chips again, because, I mean, look at them. We all gleefully chowed down on our dishes like there was no tomorrow, because honestly, there kind of wasn't. Well, there was, but we would be getting up before sunrise to get on a plane, rather than rolling out of bed to go to the beach, so cue tomorrow.
It's the final morning. Waiting for the taxi. Not very awake.
But hey, at least the sky looks super pretty. Like, goddamn. So we trundled our suitcases into the back of our taxi and sleepily rode back to Valencia airport, where we were plunged back into the masked-up, socially distanced reality of the times. We had 2 flights on the way back as well, starting with a longer one to London, and yes, that is more tomato juice, followed by some okay pasta and a cute little crumble, and then followed by a shorter flight back to Manchester, upon which I had to get one last tomato juice in alongside my cold spread before finishing my book. And just like that book, my vlog is now complete. I sincerely hope you enjoyed retroactively joining me on holiday and that you'll be back to do it again soon. If you'd like to, I'd recommend liking this video to book your tickets, subscribing to my channel to join the fast-tracked lane, and leaving a comment to get bumped up to business class. Thank you so much for watching, have a lovely day, and goodbye. So many mushrooms! To the mushrooms! To the mushrooms! So many mushrooms! To the mushrooms! To the mushrooms! So many mushrooms! To the mushrooms! So many mushrooms! To the mouth-watering selection of